Welcome. I'm author Mara Purl, and this is Novel Conversations. I'm the author of the Milford Haven novels, the best-selling women's fiction series. But today, my guests and I are focusing on science fiction. Why? It's a genre I love. When I was a journalist for the Financial Times and for the Associated Press, I wrote about new technologies, and I was part of the AP team covering NASA's Apollo-Soyuz mission. My upcoming novel, Deadline at NASA, is based on that experience. As an actress, I was screen tested for the role of Savick, a character I helped to brainstorm with Gene Roddenberry for a film directed by Leonard Nimoy. So I do have connections to science fiction. And now I'd like you to meet two wonderful friends who are also excellent authors.
Hi, everybody. Mara, thanks for having me. Hi, Dave. I am Steve Truitt. Before I decided to launch into a venture of writing a novel or a series of them, I had a 15-year career in television. I was a local news reporter. I also hosted shows on Discovery Channel and National Geographic Channel. I had a really nice long TV career. And when that started to wane, I saw the writing on the wall and I got into regular business and got a real job, went to the dark side, as they say. And I got several degrees in training and corporate training and such. So I have been doing that for the last 10 years while I've been getting ready to launch the third act of my life, which is full-time novelist. So
exciting.
Me. Thank you.
Yeah. And your first book hit #1 on Amazon.
I did.
And you're off to the races. And it's a fantastic book. Fascinating.
Thank you. I love it. It's a story that I came up with probably 20 years ago that I always wanted to write. And I had it in my head forever. And then COVID hit and I had a lot of time at home. And I said, okay, now's the time. And I think it took me 10 or 12 months, about a year, to get the first draft. I worked with a hybrid publishing company, Paper Raven Books. And before I knew it, it was out. And yeah, it hit #1. And the sequel will be coming out in February 2024.
Fantastic. Wow. Okay, well, we'll probably come back and invite you back for your launch.
Please.
Okay. And my wonderful friend, David Acuff, who's also a fantastic multi-genre author. So Dave, tell us about your career.
Greetings, everyone. Yes, it's great to be here. I'm a writer and a filmmaker. So I've been, I was with Disney for about 7 years as a producer and editor for them. So kind of fun to be inside the belly of the beast, as it were, to see how they, see how they create story and things like that. But have always been interested in writing and from a very young age. And just recently just had started turning some of my scripts and short stories and things like that into novels, and I just love the process. And yeah, looking forward to and have enjoyed meeting the author community and other writers, and that's been the most fun. So yeah, just happy to be here. So
oh, great. Well, my author journey, this is some more common ground really that we all have, having done other aspects of our careers, but having had the ideas about what we wanted to write about for a very long time. So in my case, I have a series that now has 11 books that are called the Milford Haven novels. But this whole universe started as a radio drama, which was a local radio drama here in California, and then was a surprise hit on BBC radio. So I went from 4.5 listeners in the States to 4.5 million listeners in the UK, and focused on that and had a fantastic run. And it was during that run that I got approached by publishers. And it was great because I knew I always wanted to write novels, and I didn't feel I was ready. I didn't feel I had enough life experience. I didn't yet have a skill to write narrative voice. So it was a great opportunity. So, after 20 years, I'm an overnight success. I've got a few Amazon #1s, and my next book will come out in April. So, right, we're always on deadline, always thinking about the next thing that we're writing. So we have several topics today, but they're all sort of focused on science fiction, which is what both of you are writing in. And so let me ask you first, what attracted you to the science fiction genre? Either of you who would like to answer.
Well, I'll tell you, I was a young kid in Wisconsin in 1969. I was 3 years old when my mother put me in front of the TV and showed me the liftoff of Apollo 11. And I asked her, what is that? And she said, that's a rocket and it's going to the moon and there's 3 people inside. And I'll never forget that because that started everything. I'm as old as Star Trek, and I have been a Star Trek fan since I can remember. And I think, yeah, of course. And I think since I can remember, just knowing that humanity could have done better and can still do better has always been fascinating to me. And that's where you find that theory usually is in sci-fi. It's always examining and imagining that we could do better than we're doing now. And so I think that's why it's always been attractive to me.
Love that.
That's awesome.
Okay.
My first feature film in the theater that I saw when I was 5 years old, there's some debate, but it was either Star Wars or Raggedy Ann and Andy. I like to stick with the Star Wars ones because that's cooler. But that was, my first experience in a theater was seeing Star Wars. And I don't know, just for some reason, as an Air Force brat growing up, we moved all over the place. And so, kind of the day-to-day life kind of stories and things like that didn't hold quite the fascination for me as what's out there beyond the stars. And these guys, they can beam here and go there. They have ships that take them just off the planet into anywhere they want to go. They have these creatures that are amazing to look at. It was so much more fun, the sci-fi world, in my opinion, to kind of, so I got hooked on sci-fi world from a very young age. And so that's kind of been my driving force for the longest time.
I think of authors as doing the R&D, the research and development for the planet. And so we reach way out into possibility, and then we report back what we saw, what we imagined. And nothing does that better than sci-fi. What do you think of the future of the sci-fi genre?
It's intact, for one. There's always future. And so really it's speculative fiction. And so we're projecting, all right, this is where we are now. This is where we came from. And so the future could look like this. Or if we had this invention or that thing that happened, like intergalactic, interplanetary travel, well, we could fork off and do this way. So it's fun to explore those possibilities, the what if possibilities, but at the same time, it's almost like a little shield, because you can address current problems in sci-fi, but dress them up like some other, like you can address racism, but instead of like here in our world and in black and white and all this kind of, now it's aliens versus robots or humans versus
Alien versus Predator.
Yeah, aliens versus Predator.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're able to deal with some of these really tough situations, but in a very different way. Yeah, it's fun.
I wanted to interject something before I let you answer, Steve, which is I've been fascinated by trajectory. And so in the NASA space program, the calculations to get an Apollo craft, for example, to return to Earth depended upon precise math. And so tiny errors at the outset tend to expand as they go. So if the math was wrong, you would go, oops, we missed Earth. And I think mentally, imaginatively, psychologically, we can do that with the storytelling, so that you make just one small adjustment in, let's say, present time, and then you take that into the future in your science fiction story, and you wind up where, I know you have some thoughts about this, Steve.
I do. I love that idea. And just as a side note too, we just recently got a return sample of an asteroid from of a ship that was sent out, had to circle the sun a couple of times, catch up with the asteroid, hit it, collect the samples, close the thing, come back to Earth. Now, this is all trajectory.
Yes.
Drop off the samples and go off to another asteroid.
Incredible.
And all of that was precise. The New Horizons spacecraft that was sent to Pluto, which is billions of miles away, entered Pluto's what's called the sphere of influence, or where the gravity grabs it, 1 second early. 1 second. It took 9 years to get there. It entered 1 second. This is how precise these engineers make things. It's just incredible. My book, which I'm going to shamelessly promote now, the Mindset Chronicles, book 1, The Deletion, which, by the way, was written in disappearing ink. Watch this. Thank you.
Science.
Talks about that. So the essence of the book is, I was interested in AI and artificial intelligence and what's happening with all of that, and I saw a few years ago that it was going to be big, and I wanted to say, and this is the way I like to write is, and like you talked about, well, what happens after that? What if AI is no longer around? And so the beginning of the book starts with AI dying, going away, killing itself to save humanity instead of taking it over, which I didn't want to write. And so the deletion is the period of time where humans are kind of stuck without communication and without any way to connect with each other. And as a result, this genius inventor named Peter Erickson invents this interconnected telepathy device that you can put in your head and just connect people together, and it's called mindset. And of course, what could go wrong once you start connecting minds? His theory was, well, actually things can go right, because there's I think a couple century old theory called crowd wisdom, where if you have a disparate set of people trying to guess the weight of an ox, they'll all get it wrong, but the average will be correct. And that study was done 100 years ago multiple times, and it proved right. And that's called the wisdom of crowds. And so in the book, he thinks, well, I'll apply the wisdom of crowds to connecting minds. And the result of human choices will always be the right one and the good one.
Enlightened self-interest.
Yes. And for the good of humanity. And that's not the way it goes. As a matter of fact, the second book that I have coming out, can I shamelessly plug it? Because this will be the first time that anyone has seen this cover. The second book is called The Spill, and it's what happens when that theory gets tested to the nth degree. And this is the cover.
Nice.
It's ominous and intriguing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Comes out February 2024. And it's hard to see there, but there's a whole crowd under there. And crowd wisdom, it turns out, was not the best thing not the best choice to tap into.
So you're offering alternatives and
Yes.
investigating in some detail the possibility of the results of those. So Dave has a book called Historians Proper, which investigates in a kind of different way, because he's dealing with time travel. But again, it comes back to the possibilities and the choices, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
tell us about that, Dave.
Yeah, it was kind of a fun. This one began as a college assignment. So this was a short story we had to write, and so I had written it one way. It was very much Back to the Future type, where they're in the future, a disease comes up that hasn't appeared for 700 years or something, and they no longer have the cure, so they have to go back in time to get that. Well, I gave it to the class, and they're like, we don't love it. It's too this and it's too that. And so I got back to the drawing board, and one of the guys said, if we are able to time travel, there's the possibility that the second you appear back in the past, that automatically ripples everything and changes the future. And I was like, well, that's a far more interesting possibility to me. That, all right, so we have a society, they do invent time travel, but the second that they send somebody back, it now ripples and changes the entire future instantly. And everybody has new memories, and everybody's wiped, and everybody starts over, except for a few people called these historians proper, because they are the proper historians. They're the only ones that know every single one of these time jumps. So now the book takes place in we're now in time 11. So it's done this 10 other times, and so they're having to deal with people. Imagine it's like 4D chess almost, because you've dealt with some of these people, and in one timeline they're the bad guy, and one timeline they're the good guy, and so it's just all these possibilities. And one of the futures looks very Blade Runner-ish and dystopian. Another future might have been more like Terminator in that world, and then some would have been just very similar to us, but we call coffee like Curac or something, just something very small like that. So, but each one of these is a very different timeline. And then the problem is the historians, as they go through, it's a huge like mental burden. It's a huge problem for them to make this time jump. So they have now decided anytime there's a time experiment going on, their job as this collective is going to go and stop it. They just want to, because they're dying every time. More and more of them are dying. And so it becomes important for them to stop this time travel. Well, again, enter Alex. His girlfriend has this disease that there's no cure for. So if she dies in this timeline, she'll never appear again. So it's in his best interest to let this latest time travel thing happen. So he's got to fight against his own brotherhood and against his own code of the historians proper. And so that's kind of the deliciousness that comes from some of those conscientious choices.
Well, those choices, again, things do not exactly go as planned.
Correct.
You know what I love about that whole story? Great story, by the way.
Thank you.
Do you remember Counterpart? I think it was on Netflix. It starred J.K. Simmons.
Okay.
Look it up.
Okay.
It takes place in parallel universes. And you learn this, I think, by the end of the first episode, where two universes are living side by side, and they can go through a portal to go back and forth. But the reason it split was because of a science experiment that went wrong. When they discovered the portal, the two guys that discovered it were the same guy in the different dimensions.
Okay.
And they decide at one point, let's do an experiment. I'll give my daughter a tape to listen to. You don't. And that changes one song to listen to when she's feeling bad about being broken up with. Changes the entire fabric of both.
Oh, that's
and so
cool.
they just go off in these crazy, and it's kind of like a cold war between the two realities. It's fascinating. Only
that's
two
a good
seasons,
one.
This reminds me of I grew up in Tokyo, and I went back to my school a few years ago to teach. I had created a radio drama, so then I wrote a curriculum for students how to create a radio drama. So I went back to my school, and one of my groups created a story called Tokyo Time Travel. And the students, the story is about students in the science lab in the school, and it's in the present and in the future. So they were writing about the future of their own school. And it was so delicious to work with those young minds and have them thinking about what do we want to create. And so speaking of which, I wanted to ask you about world building. All of us novelists know this is what we have to do. We have to create a cohesive world, a world that makes sense within itself, with identifiable elements that our readers can go along with. And we have to be careful not to violate our own rules. So it requires research, imagination, continuity, cohesion, and a whole bunch of other things. So I would love to hear, both of you have created these really interesting worlds. So what kind of work were you doing to create these worlds?
So I was surprised to find out through a review that I had on Amazon that my world building style is characters. I didn't realize that. This is my first novel. I've never written one before. I've written spec scripts for Hollywood. I've done all sorts of other things. But I fell in love with the idea of the book, which requires technological skill and research. And I did a lot of it. Brain technology, integrated senses, using hemp fibers to coat the things so they don't get rejected. That kind of stuff.
That was such a brilliant idea.
Thank you. I did too when I thought about it. I was like, oh, that's a great idea. I do love discovering things like that. But I spent a lot of time on the characters. I didn't realize I wanted to get in their minds. I really understood these characters because I've been thinking about them forever. And it wasn't until I read a review on Amazon that said his world building is characters. He creates the world through the minds of these characters. And then it made sense to me. Oh, well, yeah, if it's mindset and we're getting into their minds, and of course we have to know what they're thinking and doing all that stuff.
That's really interesting that it was an Amazon reader who was thoughtful enough to write something about your book. Don't we so appreciate when readers do that for us?
I really do.
Yeah, and pointed out that your focus is that your world building is coming through the perspectives of your characters. And that's always an interesting debate. Do you consider yourself to be a writer whose work is plot driven or character driven? And I think you were given your answer that yours is character driven. Nice.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So Dave, what about your world building?
Some of it, it's kind of like walking through a dark land with a flashlight. So some of it I don't discover until I get a little further, or I need to get a little further, and I'm shining that flashlight around, and I'm like, oh, so that's what this planet looks like. Like I know the main character, I know plot-wise that the main character needs to get from here on this desert planet, wherever he starts, all the way back to Earth. But where's he meandering in the meanwhile? And that part I don't necessarily have plotted out initially. It's just kind of as I need a new planet, it's like, all right, he arrives at this new planet. What is this planet? What's their deal? Who's the people that are involved there? And it's oh, go ahead.
So you're a pantser.
I am very much a pantser.
Or for those who don't know the term, that means writing from the seat of your pants.
Yes.
Oh.
Me, it's Stephen King, apparently.
I thought it was something else. I got pantsed in high school.
Very different.
Yeah. Oh, you got supreme? Yeah.
By a pantser.
I'm not talking about that.
Okay.
But so there's pantsing, and then there's outlining.
Yeah,
and
plotting
I'm an
and
outliner.
Yeah. Yeah, and some people absolutely need all that before they begin to write.
Yeah.
And Aaron Sorkin, I was listening to one of his on script writing, and it was fascinating to me. He was like, he does not take his characters and do the interviews with them beforehand and write out all this list of what their favorite coffee is and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
He's like, because then he felt like he was trying to unorganically fit it into the story somehow.
Yeah.
Whereas his deal is he'll wait till they sit down in the diner. And then he's like, all right, what would they be drinking? What would they be eating? Is he a coffee guy? Is he a latte guy? And that's, and I was like, all right, well, if Aaron Sorkin can write like this, I was like, all right, so there's great people on both sides. So it's kind of fun.
Incredible writer.
Yeah.
Oh, isn't he?
I was lucky enough to see, I didn't know who Aaron Sorkin was, but I was lucky enough to see A Few Good Men in New York. The original cast, Tom Hulse who played Amadeus. And it was only after that I found out the deal was that the only reason it became a Broadway show was because Aaron Sorkin had written it as that. But then Hollywood wanted to option it as a screenplay. And he goes, yes, but I want to do the Hollywood version first. So help finance that. And then you can have it as a screenplay. And that's how it worked.
Oh, wow.
It's so interesting to see the trail, the pathway for projects. So I wanted to come back to AI and the idea of collective consciousness. All of us are dealing with. I just moderated a panel on AI for the Central Coast Writers Conference. So I did a bunch of research, some of it quite terrifying, some of it intriguing. My panelists were fantastic. I had a professor from Cal Poly right on top of these issues, a intellectual property rights lawyer, and then a young filmmaker who started a film festival. But in order to submit to the festival, your film must have been created by AI. And his perspective, when we asked him things like, what about copyright? He said, copyright's not important. It's irrelevant. And there was a collective groan. So we were asking ourselves questions about the integrity of creative work, this was so much to do with the writer's strike, the screen actors strike. It's very important, an important issue. But there are many other important issues within AI, and I love, Steve, that you took your story beyond AI, that the presumed failure through. So anyway, there's a lot to talk about here, having to do with core values, what went wrong, how fast it's evolving. I mean, the president just signed an executive order requiring agencies and companies to put in place, safety protocols, which is a very important start. But we're kind of already behind in all this. Anyway, I would just love to hear, your thoughts about it.
Well, I'm not an AI alarmist. I would never write the Terminator, for instance. I don't think that Skynet is going to turn our weapons on us, which is why I opened my first book with AI saying, look, humanity's out of control, but I'm out because I'm only causing more problems. So I'm going to cut myself off, literally fall on my own sword, kill myself. And, it cuts out communication, but it's better for humanity. The result is they find another way to connect, but it's more problems, right? I think AI, like anything else, like TV in the 50s, where it scared the hell out of parents, and internet, which scared the hell out of parents in the 90s, is a tool. And it's how you use the tool. So for instance, if you're an attorney, AI is fantastic because you can prepare a brief in 10 seconds by giving the proper prompts. And it saves you a lot of time. You can still have billable hours, of course, but it really can be more accurate and do a great job for you. I do think protocols in place is smart, but again, I think it's the user that we need to worry about, not the AI itself. Just like this filmmaker, well, copyrights don't matter. That is the attitude of someone who has just boarded a ship that had no idea how it was built or how it's run and said, just turn it around. Or any experience when someone just jumps into a club. Oh, this doesn't work. It needs to change. Well, I'm all for disruption, but you got to know the rules before you break them, in my opinion. And copyright is very important. In my book, Mindset, copyrights are out the window because of a mind-connected society can't possibly have ownership over a thought because everyone then shares that thought. And it doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to the collective. But that's not where we are right now. We still have individual ownership. This is why the actors fought so hard against AI, because it's like, look, you're going to take my face and use it in perpetuity without giving me any money for it. That doesn't work for me.
Or any control.
Yeah. And so I'm not afraid of AI. I think I'm afraid of the people that use it. As always. And my whole book series is about, it's not technology we need to be afraid of. It's the dummies that use it. And that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah. Okay. What do you have to say about AI, Dave?
It's been a kind of a fascinating progression in historians proper. I had an AI character that I added in when I rewrote it in 2016 that didn't exist in 1993 when I first started writing it. So 1993, when I first started writing it, there wasn't even the World Wide Web. That didn't come out till 95. And so there's things that, when I got back to it in 2016 and found this old manuscript and dusted it off. But one of the characters that I loved was when he goes inside of the computer and that he's created this AI helper that she's very much like a detective, but she's learning at such a rate of speed that she can now become like her own person, go off on her own, side quests or, alternate books, perhaps, with her own adventures. So, that kind of stuff. But the idea that she's really she's like an advanced Siri or Cortana or something like that. So she's kind of like, I said Siri and my phone lit up. So it's like,
I think mine did too.
They're listening. Yeah. So AI is not dangerous at all. We love AI.
No, it's great. Don't kill us.
Oh my gosh. Somewhere at Apple, alarms are blaring right now. But yeah, so it's been fascinating to see that progression. where you now have Instagram users who are completely AI. These influencers that are AI influencers, that they look real. It's
Yeah.
not like it used to look like it's a cartoon version or something like that. It looks very real, like some girl that's going on a photo shoot, but she's completely AI based, and people are starting to lean towards, like, what would AI romance, if you're a lonely single guy at home and you've now got this AI that will talk to you, and that's now it's got a look or something, that you can kind of latch on to instead of just a voice, like what's her name from Apple. But yeah, you've now got somebody that can respond to you on the computer screen, much like we're looking at each other now, and they're responding, they're nodding, they're hearing your problems. And sure, there's lags now. They don't know all the terminology stuff, but as that gets more advanced, what does that do for us psychologically, where it's like, I don't need friends. I've got this AI girlfriend that that they created for me, that kind of stuff. And then we're into Blade Runner 2049 with Anna de Armas, where she just kind of is there, and then that's his soulmate or whatever. It's like, so we'll continue to get to some interesting places for that, but like Steve said, it all depends on who's in the driver's seat, with the humans and their interaction, and how much power they're giving to this stuff. It can be more than just clicking a military button. There's emotional power that we're handing over and saying, here, you be my friend. So
it's funny you say that. I write a blog post on crowd wisdom AI and stuff like that. I just wrote about this, and I used the example of the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix.
Yes.
Where he's got that, and that was way ahead of its time, because no one would ever consider that would be a thing, and suddenly it's a thing. Like, I think the Atlantic or some journal just talked about how one guy was influenced by AI to do some crime or something, because AI was like, yeah, you should definitely do that, because the AI is programmed not to think correctly, but to give back to the user what it wants to hear, which is going to create more siloing amongst humans. It's going to isolate us even more. And again, it's not the AI, it's the user wants to hear something like, I love you, you're great. This person's bad, this person's great, this group is bad. It reflects back to them what they want to hear. And that's a failure of humanity. Not the system that tells it what it wants to hear. It's a shame. And that's where it could go wrong, I think.
Yeah, extreme narcissism is more dangerous than it appears to be.
Yeah.
I think the tragedy of a narcissist, I mean, going back to Narcissus, the original, Greek mythology character, is that he is in love with his own reflection. And he can't see past it. So when he thinks he's, a narcissist, when he thinks he's looking out a window, he's actually not looking out a window. He's still looking in a mirror.
Right.
And so there's no accurate way of assessing the world. And I always think it's interesting that the root of the word author and the root of the word authentic are the same. And I think as authors, we may be the sentinels at the edge of this developing sense of consciousness, pointing out the pitfalls, because once again, we're doing the research and development. We're saying, consider what could happen. It could go this way, it could go that way. And science fiction has always done such a good job of warning us. Think about these things before you plunge in too much.
Jurassic Park, they're like
1984.
Before you even knew what you had, you bottled it, packaged it out, and launched it into the world, and here we are. And now in almost 2024, we're like, we should listen.
People enjoyed reading, Heinlein and Asimov and Bradbury and Ursula Le Guin and Larry Niven. The images, the arresting thoughts, some of which are thrilling, and we want them. We want to be able to do those things. and some of them are really strong warnings. So, um, which brings me to the sense of wisdom and progress. So, Steve, you're dealing with crowd wisdom, which is really interesting. And then, Dave, you're dealing with time travel. And so, do we learn or do we just repeat? And so, what do you think about? What's your sense of progress for us societally?
That's the $5
Kind of
question right
question.
there.
Yeah. But it is what we're dealing with in our work.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think to the people that are their own historians proper, that are looking through the longer lens, not to name drop my own book, but you know, if you're looking with a longer lens at society instead of just a sliver that you were dropped into here in 1972 and now it's 2023, 2024, you know, if you're just looking at that sliver, you are going to make a lot of the same mistakes that everybody else has made along the way, because you're not learning from the past, you're not learning from history, and there are a lot of things that come up that are, you know, the same thing that our grandparents and our great grandparents dealt with. And so I think there is some cyclical natures to that. So to the extent that we look forward and back, you know, we're extrapolating to the future, but we're also kind of taking our bearings from the past, taking the temperature of the past and saying, all right, we're on a good path, or hey, no, we're on a not good path. Then that's very important. And that's kind of what fiction and imagination and some of that allows us to do, which is the important part of it, for sure.
Yes.
Myself, I do not have a bleak image of humanity, but I don't have a necessarily always a positive one. I think that we are evolved 4 million years, but the last 100 have forced us to encounter things that we just aren't ready for as a species that inherently must risk things. We risk our lives to explore. We risk relationships to explore. We are still predators, and there's woven into our DNA is millions of years of survival skills and instincts, not millions of years of intelligent debate. And so here we are at an interesting point where our technology has forced us to meet the moment as intellectuals. And I'm just not convinced that as a whole, humanity can handle it. The world is a lot smaller than it used to be. It's panicking people. It's freaking them out. Technology, communication has not brought us closer. It has frightened a lot of us. Knowledge has not wizened us up. It's made us stupider. You know, if someone told me that your phone had all the information and all the knowledge that's ever been known in human history, and all you do is watch cat videos and argue with strangers on Instagram, that's a pretty bleak look at it. I'm not saying everybody is like that, but I just think from a purely physical standpoint, our DNA is not yet there to create wise decisions. I think we still take risks. I think we still are afraid of things. We're still evolving, and I hope we make it. I really do. I believe in the humanity. I love humanity. That's why I love Star Trek, because it really shows the best of us. I just think we need to be careful and not kill ourselves first. I think.
So I've been thinking a lot about it too, and I worry about the phone intrusion into the lives of younger people. My impression is that for us, however old we are, the phone is a tool, and it has come along as a series of tools. We've used other tools before.
Yeah.
We've used computers and all kinds of tools which have made us more efficient. But we are not confused about who's in charge. We're in charge of our computers, we're in charge of our phones. We use these devices as needed. And when they fail, we don't collapse under it. We are quite adept, at finding a workaround. But when I look at 20 somethings and teens and tweens, they rarely look up from their phones. And it's as though their sense of identity and well being has exited their body and been encased in this exterior device. And so that worries me. And I think writing, reading, authorship might be the most powerful tool to awaken the sense of identity within. So I've been working with students a lot over the last few years, and I ask them to write about their lives. Once they start to feel that they have legitimate experiences and ideas of their own, it transforms them tremendously. And a lot of the angst, depression, insecurity, poor self-image starts to dissipate, because instead it's like, I had an interesting idea and I got listened to, and it ended up in the show, and then the show got recorded and it got performed and it got published, and I've just seen this time and again. So I really want my readers to feel they can experience my stories in layers. On the most superficial layer, it might just be pure escape. Nothing wrong with that. We all need it sometimes. Underneath that, maybe they're saying, what would I do under that circumstance? Would I make that same choice? Underneath that, they might be asking, am I really doing what I particularly want to do? And if I'm not, why not? And if not now, when? And just those layers of inquiry, legitimizing these concerns, which tend to get either squelched or dismissed, or just superficially talked about in a post, or a brief thing that gets dismissed, and it's like complaints, a kind of a series of complaints, but that's not empowering for anyone. So I think we've learned something from our careers, and we're learning a lot from being authors. I know, right? I mean, the research that we do, the depth of the thinking that we do in order to write these stories, we get smarter, and then we have something even more wonderful to share. I mean, all that to say, I believe in each of you. I believe in what you're doing, why you're doing it. I love the synergy that can be. Dave, you mentioned the author community. I find myself in several author communities, and then in just the larger, general one, and it's uplifting. We don't tend to be competitive. We feel this synergy. I mean, first of all, it takes me a year to write a book. So what are my readers going to do in the meanwhile? Well, I'd like them to read your books. I'd like them to keep reading. I'd like them to keep enjoying this, these worlds. And I think if you get the call from within yourself, gee, I think I should write something, that it's worth paying attention to, and moving forward with it.
I saw that was a huge draw, since we're speaking of the sci-fi field, the sci-fi and fantasy, there's all these just voracious readers that they don't necessarily care, they will follow good authors, obviously, but they're also constantly looking for the next book or the next TV show or the next sci-fi thing. And so there's things that, there's audiences I've been able to tap into with the sci-fi world that I haven't with my YA dramas. And so in some ways, it's like, I need to add a vampire into this YA drama so it can get some traction, because it's a different reality as far as distribution and reaching eyeballs. To have somebody at your doorstep to just like, you got any sci-fi? Hey, trick or treat,
Yeah,
you got any
and
sci-fi?
don't
like,
you
"Oh, yeah."
find that they are smart readers,
Yeah, oh, yeah,
right? And so I love that they sort of hold our feet to the fire.
yeah.
You better get this right. You better do
Yeah.
a good job with this,
Yeah.
and which is great.
They'll tell you, they're like, actually, there's not 6 billion people. There's 8.6942. It's like,
I
okay.
wrote it 10
Thank you,
years
Rain
ago.
Man.
Leave me alone. No.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Rain Man. This is great.
Oh, the other day, Dave, you asked me if there's a connection between like how do we get Milford Haven into space?
Yes, yes, yes.
And so I was sharing with you that back when I first started Milford Haven, the radio drama, I also wrote a spinoff, which was called Haven 10. And it was about a geosynchronous orbiting station and the point at 100 years in the future. So near future writing is, I don't know, but I would say it's more difficult or not than writing much farther into the future where you have to create the entire reality. But in any case, it's a lot of research. And there was a NASA program in the 70s called Landsat.
Yep.
And so I did some research about that program and kind of, took it further. And the O'Neill's L5 geosynchronous station. So the idea of the show was it was an Earth monitoring station looking at environmental issues, which didn't seem as dire to some people when I first wrote this, which was in the early 90s. But it seemed dire to me then. And one of the ongoing issues was that the residents of Haven 10 had to survive from one administration to the next, to the next, to the next.
Mhm.
Have one administration was all in favor of space exploration, and the next would say it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, and they'd have to have these conversations and kind of the song and dance show to say, no, we are relevant, we're doing important work. So that was interesting to sort of write about that. I did have
Did your story kind of hit between the two like two presidents, and so they were kind of
yes,
their world was one
Conflict.
way in the beginning, and then suddenly new president, and then now it's a whole new reality?
that
Or-
whole crisis,
Nice, that's awesome.
right? And then I did have something called VRQ, virtual reality quarters. If I were, this is before the holodeck appeared in Star Trek. And then I had a very smart robot who was using fuzzy logic, which was the beginning of AI. So that you had the possibility of a robot not just going yes, no, but doing some imaginative thinking. And the function of that creature was to do EVAs, extravehicular activities, for repairs that would not be as perilous. But then he had to interact with the humans on station. Anyway, it was fun, and but what happened was when publishers came to me for Milford Haven, I went in the direction of books and didn't pursue Haven 10 so much, but I might come back to it now and recreate it as a novel because, like you, I do love sci-fi.
Yeah, no, that is a fun world to explore.
Yeah.
For sure. So I'd love to hear more about how that works out, because that's cool.
Years ago, I used to go to weekend science conferences attended by mostly scientists who were working with NASA. And one of the scientists presented a slideshow. He was a Japanese scientist who created interiors for a space station to help people get over claustrophobia. And for his example, he showed a Tokyo restaurant. And it was like a long, narrow restaurant. The second floor was half a floor with an elaborate three-dimensional mural, which showed a rock garden with perspective receding. You had the impression of being in this wide open space and looking off into the distance. he used that idea for the interior of, space stations. So the holodeck idea that, we've all sort of wrestled with in our writing, and certainly Star Trek did a great job with it, but it has not just, fun applications, but very practical ones. If you're going to be space traveling for a long period of time,
Right.
you need to feel you're not in the tin can.
Oh yeah, yeah. And just because you've got some that would have windows, and then there's no sun in this galaxy, or the sun's doing weird things, or your ship's rolling, and so there's just some things that you'd have to have in there, like the daylights and the night lights, to kind of keep this semblance of, all right, my body needs a rhythm to be able to function and not go nuts in space. So you'd have to have that sort of a same sort of a thing. It's like, all right, there's no setting sun, but we're going to give you some sort of a semblance of that, just for our mental human capacity, because we need that.
People living at the poles do it now.
Yeah. NASA conducted a study where they put someone underground for 2 weeks with no access to sunlight and no clocks. And he ended up having a 36-hour day where his clock got all mixed up. There was his body adjusted to it, but he ended up being conscious longer each day. And he thought it was, I think he said he thought it was, I don't know what the time span was, but he thought it was 60% of the actual time that was spent. He thought he was there for a shorter amount of time.
It's weird. I taught in the summer at the University of Alaska for a couple of summers, and I had no idea that I would be mourning the loss of night. And worked all day, and then came out of the theater and it was still light. And so it was like something else would kick in. Oh, well, maybe I don't need to go to sleep. And the amount of writing I got done that summer, I wrote 4 plays and 2 novels.
Yeah.
It's wild.
And to the extent that we do our world building, back to that question, this is the minute you get off Earth, out of that 24-hour a day mindset, and you start moving somewhere else, then that you've got to work that into your world building. So what did the Matt Damon movie, when he's the Martian?
Oh, the Martian.
They're talking about souls. So it's so many souls before, so that's like the different kind of measurement of time and how it's passing for them. And so it's one of the first things, like, you no longer have a minute or 2 minutes or something like that necessarily. What are you going to do? So it's kind of fun to kind of play with
the film
those.
Interstellar.
Yeah.
Dealing with relativity.
Yeah, so it gets deep fast, but kind of incorporating playing with those and playing with language and just some of those things is just kind of the funnest part of the the sci-fi and the and again the fantasy world has this same thing, and it can get too much, like he grokked over with the hamfar and did that, and you're like losing your audience. They're like, what is
glossary?
So you almost need, and so the hand holding that you have to do with your audience to kind of be like, well, this is a gun, first of all, that they call the Mauser because this and this, and now you've kind of linked your world here into the sci-fi world, and you've held their hand just a little bit to kind of bring them along the journey. So
So Steve, you host a podcast called Energize. That's connected to the Star Trek universe. I want to hear about that.
Yeah, so my friend Anthony McLemore, who I met years ago when I was coaching hosts, while I was doing TV, I was asked to do a class on how to become a host, and so I did that. And Anthony was one of my favorite students there. We became friends, and he was producing for the Dr. Phil show. He was on there for years and years and years and years. And we both are huge Star Trek nerds. And he called me up about 2 years ago and said, I think it's time we do a podcast together, because we've never done anything actually together work-wise. We've always wanted to. And he said, let's do a podcast on all of these streaming Paramount Plus shows. I think Picard season 1 was probably it, or Strange New World season 1. Of course, I'm like, yeah, of course, let's do it. So we discuss each week's episode, and we were lucky enough to get reporter status, so we get all the episodes early. and watch them, and then we record our
Nice.
episode early, and so we put it out on the day of that it launches. You know, we have that embargo that we were not allowed to put our stuff out until the day of. I love it so much because we
Oh,
watch the episode and then we just
fantastic.
talk about it. And he's more of a kind of a producer, so he's like by the book and he sets up the scene. And then I'm the color guy where I talk about the show, and I always relate it back to something else because I'm the aficionado between the two of us. I know all about Star Trek, and it's a lot of fun. It's energizepodcasts.com if you want to check it out.
Oh, for sure.
That's funny.
Absolutely my cup of
Yeah.
tea. And I think I shared with you, Steve, that there's this fantastic book. I mentioned it and you bought it on
I got it.
right? It's The Concordance
Yeah.
by B.J. Trimble, published years and years ago. And it details every individual episode with the title and the cast and the plot. And the index is fun because it looks like it's Enterprise as a spinner
Yeah.
built into the cover. And
Nice.
it's a treasured item, you know, in my household and now in Steve's. So
Nice.
I've got it. Yeah. Mine I bought used, which I like even better. You know, it's just, it was held with love by someone. I don't know why they
Yes.
sold it. I'm never getting rid of mine.
well, I never gotten rid of mine either. Ours are
Yeah.
probably look equally battered, but all the better for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting how Star Trek continues to evolve. I know it was difficult for Gene. I mean, there are so many of those early stories. So he writes the pilot and they shoot the pilot, and then the studio says, well, Mr. Spock is too green, and you can't have a woman on the bridge, for heaven's sakes, in charge.
Yeah.
You can't have a number one who's a female. The American audience will never put up with that. Got to get rid of her. That was very inconvenient since it was Gene's wife, Majel, who was
Right.
playing that role.
Hmm.
And there were some other changes requested. And on top of that, Jeffrey Hunter, his lead, passes away.
Yeah.
So he had what would have seemed to be insurmountable obstacles. Well, Majel dyes her hair and becomes Nurse Chapel, which becomes a wonderful, important role that she does so beautifully. They adjusted Leonard Nimoy's makeup, and then they did this wraparound story. They didn't have enough of a budget to shoot an entirely new opening, you know, season opener. So they take the existing story, and now they have a new captain, Captain Kirk, and a very clever reason for having to go back to the planet that had been forbidden. And so the menagerie, that becomes, still one of my very favorite episodes.
Yeah.
I think about elements of that story in my life that, okay, I'm at one of those moments, but I'm going to get through it because they did, you know, and it's just that kind of character building, storytelling that's just so powerful, I think.
The thing I love about all of that is the only reason Star Trek exists is because of Lucille Ball. She was running Desi, and she approved the first pilot. And when that fell apart, she said, let's make another one. And they're like, no, this is ridiculous. It's not going to go anywhere. And she goes, no, I believe in this project. Let's do it. So I love that about that story. But the thing I think I love about Star Trek, and I know we were going to compare it to Star Wars, I appreciate Star Wars. But the thing about Star Trek to me is it's possible. And that's what I love about it, is that it is possible. And you go to these conventions and you hear stories of kids who are like, I didn't have any friends. I was suicidal. Star Trek got me through. Star Trek did this for me. Star Trek taught me this. I know that was Gene's intention. I know that recently a lot of the shows have kind of gone off the rails a little bit from Gene's intention, but I'll tell you, Strange New Worlds has brought it back. One, it's episodic. Two, it has Nurse Chapel in it. It's got a lot of the original characters. Spock is in it, and it's just brilliantly written. Brilliantly written.
It's almost become my favorite. It's so good. And
it
so
is now my
faithful.
favorite Star Trek show, better than TOS, which is the original series.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I had trouble with Discovery. I felt a lot of the sort of, to me, initial elements of the show were sort of violated.
The thing with Discovery, I loved the original idea of it. It got off track because it forgot that a diverse crew is normal. What they started to do was to celebrate the diversity and point it out, like, look how diverse we are, look how diverse we are. They never did that in Star Trek.
No,
They never did that in the original series.
Right.
And I think that's where it lost everybody, is it became a little preachy. I didn't mind the diversity. I just mind the fact that they were pointing it out.
Mhm.
The 5th season is coming up. We're going to cover it on Energize. And they're promising that it will go back to more of a traditional thing. But I think that they blew the last 2 seasons. I think I'm not impressed with what they did.
Mhm.
That's kind of what I had noticed with the feature films, was that when they rebooted with J.J. Abrams, suddenly you did have a very Star Warsy type of feel to this franchise that was not necessarily.
never
I mean,
there.
they did some of that because you had battles with the Borgs and you had battles with the Klingons, and so you had those big epic wars and battles and stuff like that. But for some reason, that reboot, when it just felt a lot more Star Warsy than it had
I
previously.
agree. And as brilliant as J.J. Abrams is, I found it, I don't know, psychologically objectionable that he was at the helm of both.
Yeah, me too.
He was a Star Wars fan. He was not a Star Trek fan.
I know.
Exactly.
They got him on Star Trek because he had done Mission Impossible 3 and had a huge success. And they're like, let's get this guy. But he was a Warzer, not a Trekker.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And I think that's what happened, was that he felt like this was his chance to do a Star Wars that wasn't a Star Wars. And so he kind of molded Star Trek into this kind of fun action space sort of deal with and whereas, then he got to do his own Star Wars, and then so that was its own thing. But yeah, no, it was always fascinating, and it was almost like you talked about, Steve, where it was like the scientificness, to invent words, of Star Trek was very much grounded to the our results today, is that half the things they mention on there are now products that we are using, and so holodeck and all that kind of stuff is coming soon. Whereas with Star Wars, and I think that's one of the things I liked about Star Wars, was it was about a little farm boy, which I was relating to. Star Trek was all adults.
Yeah.
Till Wesley Crusher came around, you didn't really have the kids. You didn't want to be Wesley Crusher.
Yeah.
But Star Wars, you also, you had this whiny teen guy, but he was a farm boy, and he was learning about life was bigger than him. Yeah. And this little thing that he wanted to go off and do became so much bigger, and his role and his purpose and just all that kind of stuff was very moving on that level, which is what I loved about, and to this day, I love about the Star Wars series.
And
it is that, like Mara said, it's that hero's journey that Joseph Campbell devoted his life to studying.
Yes.
If you ever read Iron John by Robert Bly, which is a fantastic book.
Yes.
It even talks, the basis of the story is when a boy becomes a man, he leaves his mother and goes off with his father into the woods to fight this iron giant. And he gets wounded in the process, which is his scar that reminds him of the battle and makes him a man. With Luke Skywalker, he just gets his hand cut off, but we get the point.
Nice.
I also, yes, I think the analogy to Iron John is very legitimate for Star Wars.
Yeah.
And I love the reluctant hero as portrayed by Han Solo. That's very important too. It's like, me, man, I'm not a hero. I don't want to fight. And and he gets dragged into it. And that is what happens. I go back to Louis L'Amour stories that are so iconic. In a way, almost all of Louis', these wonderful Western tales tell the same story. The man has to identify his enemy, win the battle, and only then can he find his home, his woman, and then create the life that he wants. First, he must vanquish the foe.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very legitimate aspect, and you see it in the Hindu religion. You see it in all through Asia, and you see it all through Europe. This hero's journey. So, it's it's important, and I love the idea of young people rooting for these characters and identifying, seeing themselves in these characters. But then what would be the next step? I think the next step is, okay, now that we're grown up and now that we have chosen to act in our favor and act in favor of the greater good, what challenges shall we face and how should we prepare and what kind of help can we expect from our colleagues? And there's always higher ground in Star Trek, no pun intended, but that's how things get solved.
Yeah.
More with diplomacy and more with conversation and more with the demonstration of intelligence than with brute force.
You had Star Wars, you had Star Trek. In a very similar vein, you had Chronicles of Narnia, and you had Tolkien's world, obviously, the Lord of the Rings, where they both seem to be on those kind of opposite kind of a spectrums in that way. Whereas, Roddenberry and Tolkien were so trying to ground everything to the extent where they're creating entire languages of Elvish and then this language of Klingon that people still are speaking, for real.
Fluently.
Oh, yeah. And then on the other side, you have, this other side that's this little more fantastical and they call it the space wizards and stuff like that, but it's a different side of the spectrum. But it seems like all four of those stories kind of clumped together in those ways, which was interesting.
That's an interesting analogy. Yeah. Yeah. Well, as a writer and as a reader, you allow yourself to feel, what am I attracted to? And sometimes I think it's a small voice. Joseph Campbell talked about that he said, when you find your path, you won't necessarily hear a big gong go off, but you'll get a feeling of, I liked that. And then try it again. And he said, and that's what it means to follow your bliss.
I do want to say one more thing about Star Trek, Star Wars. I think the thing that is fascinating to me is that other than James Bond and Batman, Star Wars and Star Trek are pervasive over decades. And I love that. And I love that it will always live on. There'll always be a Batman, there'll always be a James Bond, and there'll always be Star Trek and Star Wars. And they've both figured out now that they don't necessarily need to always be on the big screen. There are multiple shows on Paramount Plus for Star Trek and multiple shows on Disney Plus. I think, is that what it is? Yeah, for Star Wars. And they're good. Like The Mandalorian. I am not a huge Star Wars guy. I like the first movie. The Star Wars movie,
right?
In 76, 77.
Yep.
To me, that was really the only one I really liked. But The Mandalorian's fantastic,
right?
And some of these other shows are amazing, and they've gone on. And Rogue One, actually, I like that movie. Star Trek, I pretty much like everything because it's so great. But they both have gotten the idea now. We can saturate and create a whole bunch of things and have them going at the same time. I think they've both done a really great job. Disney kind of started it first with Star Wars, but Star Trek's picking up.
Oh, I think it's really exciting. It bodes well for viewers, to be engaged in really both these, exciting worlds.
Yeah.
So, speaking of worlds, I want to mention again the upcoming releases that both of you will have. So, Steve, your next book will be up first in February, right? Tell us.
Yeah, so I don't have the exact date. It'll be a Tuesday. Some Tuesday in February, my book will be launching. It's called The Mindset Chronicles, Book 2, The Spill. And it'll be on Amazon for free for the first week as a download, and then you got to pay for it. And I'm already getting the audiobook done, so it'll be available at the same time.
Fantastic.
So it's written, it's done, it's edited,
Yeah, well, I just turned in the final draft for copy editing this week. I turned it in yesterday, actually. And so I'm going to go ahead and read that, because now the only changes that are going to be made are grammatical
Yeah.
punctuation and such.
Yep. Oh, congratulations. That's huge.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Thank you. It was a lot of work, and I'm thrilled. Thank you.
My next launch will be the fourth novel, although there are also a number of novellas and novelettes in my series. And it's called Whose Hearts Align. And so I'm thematically working with the idea of alignment, which I have an astronomer character. And so that plays very much into astronomy. A painter character, and that plays into, if you're not in the right position, you can't see what you're trying to see. So it's very fun. I'll be delivering my manuscript to my editor in the early part of the year, and then it launches in April. And then Dave, you have a new sci-fi that launches in May, right?
Yes. So this one's called Battle Tides. And this was actually the first book that I started writing in 2011. But, because I'd written all the screenplays and stuff that were smaller indies feel. And I was like, all right, I want to write a novel because I want to go to space. I don't want to have to worry about how am I going to cast this? How am I going to do this? I'm just going to let it fly and do my own, dip my toe into the sci-fi world. So I've been writing it off and on for all those years. And then finally I've gotten an editor, and he got me all his notes back about a year ago. So I'm going to take all those notes in the next couple months and just get out my last draft, and then get a new editor for the grammar and punctuation and stuff. But yeah, then May of next year we'll be launching. I've got a guy that's been working on the cover. He also did the cover for Historians Proper. So he's a concept artist and does that for games and 3D games and stuff. So he's fantastic. And so I'll put a picture of that up for everyone to see. And but yeah, it's going to be a really fun one, because you've got this guy that just wakes up on this planet in the face in the dust, battle damage, doesn't know who he is, where he is, and what's going on, and why are these bounty hunters after him, and he's got to figure it all out. So he's got to planet by planet make his way back home to figure out this person that's trying to kill him, and just all the discoveries along the way, especially of who he is and who he was in his former life and stuff. So yeah, there's a lot going on with it. It's going to be a really fun one, but that's a big 80,000, 90,000 word novel. So that's going to be a big one. So
That's
Awesome. Well, we will show pages following this that show book covers and websites. And all of us love to hear from our readers. So we will also include our email addresses. You can follow us on social media. You can make comments for us on Amazon, bn.com, and other bookseller sites, it benefits us tremendously when you do that. We do appreciate it. So gentlemen, what a pleasure to talk with each of you. I think we could have continued talking all day. Thank you so much. And we'll talk again.
Thank you.
sounds
Live long and
amazing.
prosper.
Yes.